Story 1. My name is Gabriel, and this story happened in June 2019, about a week and a half after school let out for summer. My cousins Gonzalo, Christian, Ica, and I were going to have a sleepover to celebrate my 13th birthday, something we had been planning for months. They arrived around 6 p.m., and we were all set for an incredible night. Little did we know, that night would traumatize us for life, but I'll get to that later. For the first hour and a half, we ate junk food, listened to music, and played video games on my PlayStation 4. After finishing a few rounds of Fortnite, Gonzalo suggested going outside to play soccer. It was a warm but stormy night, so playing soccer wasn't really an option. Gonzalo then suggested we play another game outside, and we ultimately decided on hide and seek in my backyard. To give you an idea of the layout, my backyard is pretty large. When you step out the back door and look ahead, there's a dense forest, with fences on both the left and right sides of the house. We have a deck, a shed, and lots of other features, making it a perfect spot for games like soccer or hide and seek. We split into teams, Gonzalo and Ica versus Christian and me. Christian and I agreed to hide first, which Gonzalo and Ica accepted. The deck was chosen as the safe zone, so we had to start near the forest while the seekers counted inside the house. I ran about 15 feet into the forest and hid behind a tree, keeping an eye on Gonzalo and Ica's movements. I wasn't sure where Christian had gone. Once the seekers finished counting, I saw 2 flashlights moving across the yard in my direction. I crept toward the shed, hiding in the narrow space between the shed and the fence, and peeked around the corner to locate Gonzalo and Ica. As they moved toward the right side of the house, I suddenly noticed a figure dressed in dark clothing running out of the shadows from the side of my house and into the forest. Christian had been wearing a navy blue shirt and black shorts, so I didn't think much of it at first. Apparently, Ica heard the sound of footsteps on the wet grass and began sneaking toward the edge of the forest, calling Christian's name mockingly. Just then, Christian emerged from under the deck, shouting, "Don't go over there." "That's not me." Confused, I realized I had seen someone else running into the forest. My stomach churned as I connected the dots. I bolted out from behind the shed, yelling that the game was over and ordering everyone to return to the house immediately. Once inside, Gonzalo, the oldest at 15, stayed by the window to watch the forest while Christian, Ica, and I ran upstairs to my parents' bedroom, locking the door behind us but leaving it unlatched in case Gonzalo needed to come up. It's important to note that my parents were out of town that night and wouldn't return until the next morning. As we pressed our ears to the door to listen, we heard Gonzalo screaming at the top of his lungs and running upstairs. We let him in, locked the door, and jammed a chair under the knob. Gonzalo, out of breath and stammering, tried to explain what had happened, but Christian hushed us all. That's when we heard the sound of breaking glass downstairs, followed by something heavy hitting the floor, likely a rock. Minutes of silence passed before we heard footsteps approaching the staircase. We scrambled to hide. Ica and I crawled under the bed, while Gonzalo and Christian hid in the closet. The intruder moved from room to room, and we could hear doors opening and closing. When the footsteps reached my parents' locked bedroom door, the intruder began laughing, a raspy, deranged laugh that still sends chills down my spine when I think about it. Ica grabbed the phone from my dad's desk and called 911 while the man started kicking the door. Christian found a screwdriver in the desk and decided to open the door and stab the man, hoping it would give us enough time to escape. As soon as he opened the door, he stabbed the man's arm, causing him to scream in pain. We seized the opportunity to run past him, down the stairs, and out the front door, heading straight to our neighbor Mary's house. We pounded on her door, waking her up, and she let us in after hearing our frantic story. Less than 5 minutes later, police arrived, stormed into my house, and came out shortly after with the man in handcuffs. Even at 13, it was satisfying to see him arrested. For years later, I still remember that night vividly. In May, Gonzalo revealed in a group chat why he had screamed that night. While watching the forest from the window, he had seen the man emerge, sprinting toward the house with an impossibly wide grin. That night remains the most terrifying experience for any of us. Story 2. I've always loved visiting my grandparents' house, simply because I enjoyed spending time with them and seeing my favorite cousins. But I've always had mixed feelings about the house itself. Every time I visited, I had an odd sense of paranoia that I couldn't quite explain. Strange things had happened to me in that house before, but the first event I can remember was when my brother and my cousins, Mariana and Antonio, and I were playing hide and seek. Mariana and I were the seekers, and we gave my brother and Antonio 60 seconds to hide, since the house is large and has plenty of hiding spots. After counting to 60, we started searching. We went through my grandparents' room, the bathroom, the kitchen, the guest room, everywhere. But unfortunately, we couldn't find them. Then we remembered we hadn't checked the basement. Mariana didn't want to go down there, but my childish mind didn't want to seem scared, you know? So I convinced her to come with me. I had always been afraid of that basement, but we had to find them. The basement door didn't have a lock, so anyone could open it and hide down there. We opened the door and slowly made our way down the creaky stairs with a nearly dead flashlight. I remember feeling this weird sensation inside me, and Mariana whispered, "Do you think they're trying to scare us?" I didn't have time to answer because as soon as we reached the last step, the door slammed shut behind us. Mariana screamed, and I dropped the flashlight. I panicked, grabbed it off the floor, and tried turning it on, but it was completely dead. We bolted up the stairs, flung the door open, and ran outside to the front yard. My grandma was outside watering her flowers. When she saw how frightened we were, she asked what had happened. We explained, and she said it was probably my brother and cousin playing a prank on us, having seen us go into the basement and slamming the door to scare us. At this point, we'd been searching for them for about 30 minutes. "The game is over," my grandma said, and she helped us look for them. We searched the entire house again, this time with her, but we still couldn't find the boys anywhere. Eventually, my grandma got worried and called my grandpa, who wasn't home at the time. My grandma had hearing issues, so she always used the speakerphone. Mariana and I froze when we heard my grandpa say something like, "Oh, don't worry, the boys are with me. We went to the store to grab dinner about 40 minutes ago." Yes, my brother and cousin were much older than us, about 14 and 15 at the time, while I was 9, and Mariana was just 8. We found out that they hadn't even been playing with us. When we were counting, they'd left the house and joined my grandpa on his trip to the store. My grandma insisted she had been outside the whole time and said she didn't close the basement door. It wasn't just a normal door closing, it was a loud, forceful slam. There was no one else in the house but us, so I have no rational explanation for what happened. And neither did anyone else. The door itself was also very heavy, so there's no way the wind could have shut it. The next day, my parents came to pick us up, and we left. My dad was in the military at the time and was reassigned to a different unit, so we moved to another city. Now we were over 400 kilometers away from my grandparents' house and only visited once or twice a year at most. It was Christmas 2014. My dad had a few days off work and decided we'd drive the 400 kilometers to spend the holidays with the family. I was nervous, but when we got there, I actually felt fine this time. That strange feeling of paranoia seemed to be gone, at least at first. Everything was great until after dinner, when everyone went to bed. The house was packed, so space was limited. I wanted to sleep in the same room as my brother, but he didn't let me, so my grandma set me up on the couch in the living room next to the Christmas tree and the damn basement door. It's safe to say I was scared and couldn't sleep for a long time, constantly watching the basement door, thinking something might open it and drag me downstairs. Eventually, I did fall asleep, but not for long. I woke up in the dark and turned on my tablet to check the time. It was around 4 a.m. I rolled over, facing the small hallway leading to the basement door, and closed my eyes. A minute later, I heard what sounded like footsteps. My grandparents' house has old wooden floors that often creak, so I figured it was just the house settling. But when no one entered the nearby bathroom, I opened my eyes and looked down the hallway. I froze when I saw what looked like a black, shadowy mass. It had legs and what seemed to be a head, but it wasn't doing anything, just pacing the hallway like it was anxious about something. I stared at it for what felt like a second before I started screaming like crazy. Moments later, my grandpa came out of his room, turning on all the lights. The second the light came on, the figure disappeared. I was crying hysterically, and my grandpa thought someone was trying to break in. He searched the house, but found nothing. Everyone woke up and came downstairs, asking what had happened. I told them what I'd seen, expecting them to think I was crazy, but instead, they exchanged strange looks with each other. It's safe to say I ruined Christmas that year. Everyone went back to bed, and I switched rooms with my brother. Story 3. My wife and I were staying at a local Airbnb during a trip to visit my family in Mexico. After spending a couple of days with my parents and enjoying their company, we decided to book an Airbnb a few hours south of my mom's house. We wanted a little getaway and some fun before going back to our monotonous lives of working jobs we both hated. We had the whole weekend ahead of us, and the Airbnb only cost 2,000 pesos a night, not bad at all. The house wasn't huge, but it was decently sized. It wasn't 2 stories, but it did have a basement decked out as a man cave. It had a bar, a pool table, foosball, and more. It was pretty cool. We didn't spend much time down there, but it was a nice addition to the house. Over the weekend, we explored local hiking trails, swam in the backyard pool, and even went fishing at a nearby lake. Everything was going great until the last night. My wife was sound asleep, but for some reason, I couldn't settle down. I felt restless. I got up, went to the bathroom, and decided to go outside to smoke a joint. While I was midway through my joint, I noticed something in the distance. It was pretty far away, but I could tell it was a person, or at least I was pretty sure it was. What else could it have been? It was too tall to be an animal. The figure stood completely still on the beach across the street. I couldn't tell if it had noticed me or if it was looking in my direction. It was too dark, and it was too far away to be certain. To me, it just looked like a shadow. The shadow figure eventually disappeared from view, moving behind a house that blocked my line of sight. I was about to go back inside, but then I thought, why not take a quick walk and smoke another joint? By the time I'm done, I'll definitely be tired enough to sleep. I grabbed another joint from inside, along with a snack, and started walking toward the beach. It was a beautiful night, and there was no one around. I found a nice bench to sit on after walking for a while, just taking in the nature around me. The moon looked beautiful, and in my slightly high state, the scenery felt even more surreal. When I finally decided to head back, I realized I'd lost track of time. Worse, I didn't have my phone with me. I hoped my wife, Avery, hadn't woken up and panicked because of my hour-long absence. As I approached the house, I froze. The front door of our Airbnb was wide open. My first thought was that something terrible had happened. There was no way I would have left the door open with my wife alone inside, not in the middle of the night. I sprinted to our bedroom, heart pounding. There she was, lying in bed, still asleep, exactly as I'd left her. Relief washed over me, but it didn't explain why the door was open. Maybe I had made a stupid mistake, though I didn't think that was possible. I'm usually very protective and aware of my surroundings. Still, the thought of something being off nagged at me, so I decided to check around the house. The moment I made that decision, a sense of dread crept over me, like my entire body was warning me not to go through with it. But I couldn't ignore it. I checked every room on the main floor, and nothing. No signs of anyone or anything out of place. Then I realized I hadn't checked the basement. Slowly, I descended the stairs, flipping on the lights as I went. The basement was eerily quiet. The silence was heavy, making the space feel suffocating. I forced myself to move forward. That's when I heard it, a notification sound, like a text message. It wasn't my phone. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. I turned the corner and saw nothing, no one. But then I noticed one of the basement's escape windows was wide open. As I walked toward the window, I saw a phone lying on the floor near the recliner. It was still lit up, buzzing with message after message. The last texts were from someone warning, "Get out of there. He's back home." Whoever had been in the house must have escaped through the basement window. I don't know if I forgot to lock the front door that night or if they had picked the lock to get inside, but I was grateful nothing worse had happened. I woke my wife, told her everything, and we packed up to leave that very night. We didn't want to risk whoever it was coming back while we were asleep.